With the NBA season just about a month away, we've seen a lot of changes happen throughout the league. This offseason, we've seen a lot of guys move through both trade and through free agency, as well as some new draft picks that are coming into the fold. The power dynamic between all of the teams in the NBA has changed up in different ways. We've seen young teams get ready to blossom and make their debuts in the NBA playoffs, as well as our long-standing franchises start to age out. Today, I'll present to you my power rankings and where I think these teams will stand this season. Every team is ranked within one of the 5 tiers: contenders, on the cusp, playoff teams, play-in potential, and capture the flag. The first tier is the contenders. My number one team coming into next season is going to be the Boston Celtics, the best and most dominant team last season, who went on to almost sweep their way through the playoffs en route to winning the first title in the Jays era. They keep the same core while adding some nice pieces to round out the roster. They should remain the favorite to repeat, but since the Warriors, no one has repeated, and Boston could be the first to do so. My number 2 team is going to be the OKC Thunder. Last year's new kid on the block, OKC exploded from being a play-in team to being the number 1 seed in the West. With Shea ascending into real MVP contention, this team is ready to make the leap. The additions of Hartenstein and Caruso, as well as shipping out of their biggest weak point in Josh Giddey, this will be a massive upgrade for OKC. The biggest X factor will be how big of a leap do Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren take in their second and third seasons respectively. Last season, Sam Presti said he didn't want OKC to just make a playoff appearance, but an arrival. And this season, they will have finally arrived. My third ranked team is the New York Knicks. Probably the most improved team this offseason, the Knicks are looking to challenge the Boston Celtics at the top of the East. Assembling essentially a role-player super team with the Nova Knicks, picking up Mikal Bridges as a third option is going to be so much more impactful than people realize. There's 2 main concerns that comes with this team. How does Julius Randle fit, and what is the situation at center? With that being said, a healthy season could ultimately see the Knicks making a deep playoff run and potentially the first finals appearance since 1999. At number 4, we have the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Wolves sat atop the Western Conference for much of last season, and for good reason. The Anthony Edwards ascension has been very real, and he's shown it in the playoffs as well as in FIBA. Last year, they built an identity on tough defense, but outside of Ant, they lacked the offensive diversity to make that finals push. They drafted bucket-getting point guard Rob Dillingham in the lottery this summer. Will he be the answer to their problems? If Ant-Man takes that leap into the MVP conversation, the Wolves could be a tough out in the West. At 5, I have the Dallas Mavericks. Having finally made this finals last season, the Mavs have finally put a team around Luka that can amplify his strengths. One of the biggest signings of the offseason, they brought in Klay Thompson. Despite him being below his own standards last season, he still shot around 39% from 3 on volume. They also brought in Quentin Grimes, who I think will have a resurgent season playing off of Luka and Kyrie. I think Derek Lively will make a case for MIP, not based on the jump in stats, but a massive increase in impact. We know what we're going to get from Luka, but with the additions made, he could possibly finally win that MVP and championship that he's been coveting. Last team in the contending tier, I got the Orlando Magic. First hot take of the video, I'm a real believer in the Magic. Franz Wagner had an unprecedented bad shooting season, and was still arguably the most important player on the team. I don't see him struggling like that this season. The pickup of KCP in free agency is huge for the Magic. He can defend, space the floor, and move the ball as needed. The biggest thing that this placement rides on is Paolo Banchero taking that year 3 leap. I firmly believe he will lead the Magic to a top 3 seed in the East and finish top 5 in MVP voting. The Magic have a defensive foundation already, and with some of the jumps they've made offensively, not only through adding players through free agency, but also internal improvement, I believe the Magic will be in the race to win the East. The next tier are teams that are just on the cusp. Just outside the contending tier is the Bucks. The first year of Dame and Giannis was very up and down. They were around the 2 seed all year before hiring Doc Rivers and dropping to 3rd. By far the biggest issue with this team is age and health. Giannis had a historic season before going down with injury and missing the playoffs. Damian Lillard was also hurt and ended up losing in the first round. With an aging roster, what will they look like this year? At the end of the day, you can never really discount Giannis. He's always going to make stuff happen. The 76ers made the biggest signing of the offseason, bringing in Paul George. Of all the teams in this tier, the 76ers have the highest chance to move up. They have the most well-rounded star trio in the league. Similar to the Bucks, the health of Embiid, and even Paul George to a degree, will determine the ceiling of this team. Joel Embiid was the runaway favorite for MVP last season before sustaining serious injury. He could do the same thing this year. Maxey was also a borderline All-NBA talent. Ultimately, this team could peak really high, but if they can't stay healthy, they could slide heavily like last season. One of the weirdest teams to gauge is the Memphis Grizzlies. The entire roster was injured last season, resulting in one of the worst seasons in the Ja Morant era. Rust is going to be a big thing to monitor for this team. Ja missing all but 9 games with a shoulder injury is worrying, as well as Desmond Bane and Triple J missing most of the year. The addition of Zach Edey is massive for them, literally. They were the best when they had Steven Adams as a screener, and Edey adds that paired with better rim protection and a paint scoring threat. Also worth noting that Gigi Jackson being out for some time plays a part in them being lower than they could be, potentially. At 10, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers. With Donovan Mitchell re-signing, the Cavs can finally relax and focus on maximizing the talent around it. Darius Garland had a really down season due to a variety of terrible injuries, but I would expect him to have a bounce-back season. The ceiling of the Cavs will depend on Evan Mobley finally making an offensive jump. He's been great at what he does in his first 3 seasons, but they need him to be a real scoring threat in order to elevate the Cavs, and I don't know if he has that in him. A sneaky good pickup they made this offseason was drafting Jalen Tyson at 20, a guy who I think, if given the minutes, could be in contention for Rookie of the Year. In the last 2 seasons, this core has been bested by some really great teams. This time around, they've made adjustments, and now they just need to make that extra leap. At 11, we have the Kings, who are ready to go all in with this group. After ending their playoff drought 2 seasons ago, they're ready to get back in the mix. They traded for DeMar DeRozan and re-signed Malik Monk to a steal of a contract. Monk being a massive contributor for them last year, and DeMar DeRozan being an all-star caliber player. There are a lot of questions about the fit between DeMar, Fox, and Sabonis, on top of the pre-existing defensive concerns. This team could really make noise in the playoffs, but I don't know if they have what it takes to beat the rest of the West. Wrapping up this tier is the Phoenix Suns. After a disappointing year, this is pretty much a boom or bust season for them. The trio of Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal was elite offensively last year, but they just couldn't score enough to overcome the defensive deficit they were facing. They brought in 2 point guards in Tyus Jones and Monte Morris, so all the playmaking responsibilities won't fall exclusively on the main trio. The biggest issue they had was falling apart in the 4th quarter, and I don't know if they'll be able to overcome this season. The next tier are playoff caliber teams. At 13 is the Denver Nuggets. I have a lot less confidence in the Nuggets after the offseason that they just had. Losing KCP for nothing is definitely hard for them, and I don't know if Christian Brown is good enough to fill that role. Jamal Murray was injured for all of the playoffs, and the Olympics were a pretty awful showing for him too. A lot of their season is going to depend on if he can get back into form. They also lost their 1st round pick this year on DeRon Holmes to an Achilles tear, and he was expected to be a real contributor. A sneaky X factor for them is going to be the development of Julian Strawther. He had an insane showing in Summer League, and if he can translate even 60% of that, he could have a case to be the starting 2 guard. And at the end of the day, they still have the reigning MVP and the best player in the world in Jokic, but ultimately, I just don't know if they're good enough anymore. 14, we have the Indiana Pacers. Despite making the conference finals last season, I don't have as much confidence in them as others. Tyrese Halliburton made his playoff debut and despite being injured, helped lead them far. This year, he's going to have to be able to leverage his scoring to really elevate his playmaking to the next level. A big question mark is, what is year 3 Ben Mathurin going to look like? After a pretty elite rookie season, he seemingly regressed in year 2. Year 3 should be pretty telling of what kind of player he'll be and how he fits with the Pacers going forward. A storyline to monitor will be Andrew Nembhard's scoring lead. After playing like a legitimate star against the Celtics in the conference finals, there's a need for a 3rd guy to take the reins, and Nembhard is primed to do so. There's a lot to like with this Pacers team, but despite that, it just feels like a team that's a couple years away from really being in that top tier. Right in the middle of the list is the Pelicans. Last season, there was a lot to work with, but this year they have some pretty high-end potential. In the offseason, they traded for DeJounte Murray, which feels like a little bit of an odd move considering the roster. Him and CJ McCollum should work together really well, but playing off of Brandon Ingram and Zion could be different. The point Zion experiment seems to be ready to enter the next phase. To this day, no one has been able to stop him in any way, shape, or form. Him adding legitimate playmaking has given them a new step forward. Keeping Brandon Ingram still raises some questions because he, Zion, and Murray are all guys who are best with the ball in their hands. They also have some serious questions at center, and I think they'll have to find a way to get a legit rim protector who can also space the floor, and that would be the thing that gets them to a higher trajectory. 16, we have the Los Angeles Lakers, and truth be told, I don't like how this team is constructed at all. The front office's thirst for names has set them up so poorly for real success, both in the short term and the long term. They have no assets to make a trade, and the players around LeBron and AD are just not up to par. LeBron has managed to keep Father Time at bay, turning 40 this year, but it seems like his window to win a championship in LA has finally closed. The Heat are always the hardest team to predict, especially because they always seem to be a different team in the postseason versus the regular season. With rumors of Jimmy Butler being on his way out, I don't know who would be the guy to really take his place. Something I think could be huge for them is Kel'el Ware being legit at the 5, meaning Bam Adebayo can play the 4. Bam also being a willing three-point shooter in the Olympics is massive for the trajectory of this team. I think Pat Riley will really have to reevaluate how much he values the Heat culture over getting real stars this season. Because of all the places, how the hell does Miami not get superstars all the time? Rounding out this tier, another team I think will take a massive leap this year is the Houston Rockets. To me, they have a similar vibe to the 2019 Brooklyn Nets with D'Lo. Both in a contract year, Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green could be on their way to playing their best basketball yet. Sengun took a leap last year, while Green kind of regressed. After a full season of Ime Udoka coaching out any bad habits they might have formed and putting them in a real basketball situation, this could be the year that they're ready. The thing that really takes this team to the next level is going to be the roster depth. I expect a year 3 leap from Jabari Smith Jr., as well as an insane second unit headlined by Amen Thompson and the potential Rookie of the Year in Reed Sheppard. The Rockets have a real chance to break out and skip the play-in altogether if things click the right way. They could be a real fun team to watch, and they could be some real disruptors in the playoffs. The fourth tier are teams with play-in potential. The Hornets headline what looks to be a really fun tier of teams. The duo of LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller should put this team on a better trajectory. When LaMelo Ball has been healthy, he's put his teams into playoff contention. With him taking a real scoring leap this last season in his limited time on the court, I think a healthy season could elevate the Hornets. After a stellar rookie season, Brandon Miller could enter that upper echelon of scoring wings sooner than later. A healthy season could see this team overachieve, especially compared to the last couple of years. The Warriors see themselves fall into this tier after a season of real struggle and regression from their core members. While Steph Curry hasn't shown any real signs of slowing down, the loss of Klay Thompson, as well as the regression of Andrew Wiggins and Draymond Green, doesn't really bode well for their future. Brandon Podziemski could be a legit core piece going forward, and this season. Steve Kerr reportedly wants him taking around 10 threes a game. I think there's some star potential in his future. The biggest questions will be around the futures of Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, their 2021 lottery picks. Apparently, the Warriors don't plan on giving a Kuminga extension, so he could be on the move. While the Warriors are still competitive, I don't see them making much leeway in a stacked Western Conference. Similar to the Warriors, the Clippers have an aging roster and not a lot of wiggle room. With Paul George gone, Kawhi Leonard and James Harden are really going to have to step up, and in recent years, relying on Kawhi Leonard has not been the best strategy. They made a couple of sneaky good pickups this offseason, getting Chris Dunn and Kevin Porter Jr. Despite his character and off-the-court issues, KPJ could legitimately elevate this team if he plays the way that I think he can. It's hard to bet against Kawhi Leonard, but with his recent run of serious injuries, I don't know how much they can rely on him to be there. And on top of that, they don't really have any real draft assets for quite some time. With a new front office, I think the Pistons will finally break out of the basement of the NBA. Cade Cunningham is finally going to get his recognition as an all-star caliber player. He's shown that he can still make things happen despite the absolute worst possible roster construction. This year, bringing in legit floor spacers could open up the floor and allow Cade to really show that he's that guy. The signing of JB Bickerstaff will be a godsend to an organization looking for direction. He took a young Cavs team and gave them an identity, and I think he'll do the same in Detroit. While this team is still a very long way from being competitive, I think this is the year they'll finally take strides forward. Probably one of the most fun teams to watch this year, the San Antonio Spurs have potential to jump high. I've been very vocal about this for a while, but I fully believe Victor Wembanyama will make a legit MVP case, even despite his team's lack of real success. He should be the runaway favorite for Defensive Player of the Year, and I think his offensive jump, paired with Chris Paul, will be enough to really start that conversation about what the most valuable player actually is, similar to Russ in 2017. The addition of Chris Paul will do numbers for all the young guys, especially Devin Vassell and newly drafted Stephon Castle. While this is still a development year, Victor Wembanyama could legitimately put this team in some conversations that realistically they should not be ready for. The Atlanta Hawks are in a very peculiar situation. They were a play-in team last year and somehow lucked into the number 1 pick. With their 2025 pick gone and Trae Young still on the roster, the Hawks will have to find a way to try and be competitive. Having taken Zachary Rizache number 1 overall, they'll have to find a way to prioritize his development, despite not being a franchise caliber player. They could look towards trading their older guys like Clint Capella and maybe even DeAndre Hunter so that Jalen Johnson, Onyeka Okongwu, and the other young guys can get the touches that they need. And the last tier is the capture the flag tier. The Utah Jazz are on the border of a tanking team and potentially looking at a play-in. Re-signing Lauri Markkanen cements him as one of the franchise centerpieces. He's elevated himself to an all-NBA caliber player, and pairing him with a potential franchise changer in this draft would be exciting. They have a very promising core of young players in Keontae George, Taylor Hendricks, Bryce Sensabaugh, Cody Williams, and Walker Kessler. They could exceed expectations, but with Cooper Flagg on the line, I doubt that they're going to try too hard to win. The Raptors are another team that could be potentially better than expected, but they simply lack an identity. Scottie Barnes made the All-Star leap in year 3 before somewhat tailing off because of injury. The trio of Scottie Barnes, RJ Barrett, and Emmanuel Quickley could be a very promising core of players going forward. They'll have to round out their roster over the next few years and just see what kind of internal development they can get over the course of this season. Seemingly on the brink of a full-on rebuild, the Bulls are positioning themselves to be in the capture the flag race. The trade of Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey was the first one made since the Nikola Vucevic trade in 2021, marking the start of a rebuild. Giddey has potential to be the MIP this season now that he'll have the ball in his hands again. Kobe White also had a massive breakout last season, and with DeRozan gone, should see a major uptick in his scoring. The next step will be to find suitors for Vooch and Levine, and if Flagg is off the board, look for a big man of the future in this draft. In a similar position to last year, the Blazers will need to let their players develop. A pretty bad start to the year had Scoot Henderson trying to re-establish himself throughout the season. Towards the end of the year, he finally caught a rhythm and hopefully will carry his momentum into this season. The other core piece is Shaedon Sharpe, who showed massive strides in the early part of the season before sustaining injury and struggling before shutting it down for the rest of the year. Anthony Simons and DeAndre Ayton are interesting because just having reset, they don't necessarily fit the timeline of the Blazers. They could be on the move. Ultimately, it's a season about development, but I think their main guy is going to be the one coming up in this next draft. The Nets are ready to bottom out for Flagg. Trading Mikal Bridges away to the Knicks of all teams signifies that they're ready for a reset. While expected to be awful, they still have a lot of valuable players that they can trade away. Cam Johnson is the biggest name, but even guys like Bogdanovic, Schroeder, and Dorian Finney-Smith could be better on good teams. Their biggest bright spot is Cam Thomas. Up to this point, he's been nothing but a volume scorer. This year, he might set a record for field goals attempted in a season. But with the ball in his hand so much, he could be encouraged to develop his playmaking skills. They also re-signed Nicholas Claxton, who was a D-boy candidate with the KD Nets just before they blew it up. He could look a lot like Jarrett Allen in the right context. They also took on a bunch of reclamation projects, signing guys like Killian Hayes, Zaire Williams, and Keon Johnson. They also have some very promising young guys in Noah Clowney and Jalen Wilson. The Ben Simmons part could be very interesting because he's in a contract year and supposedly he's healthy, so this could be a really big problem for the Nets if they're really trying to tank for a top pick. This should be a pretty bad year for the Nets, but it won't be a wasted one. Wrapping up this rankings is the Washington Wizards. By far the worst team in the league. All they can do is simply go out there and try their best. The main focus should be on their 2 lottery picks, Bub Carrington and Alex Sarr. Truthfully, Alex Sarr has some really bad signs and looks a lot like another Wizards top pick some 20-ish years ago. It's not over for him, but things definitely don't look good. The main draw will be Bub Carrington. Local DMV kid, from what he showed in Summer League, has a very real chance to win Rookie of the Year. I personally think he'll end up as a top 2 player in this draft. They also have Bilal Coulibaly, who looks like he's on trajectory to be a really good player. I'd like to see him get a lot of reps as a ball handler and a decision maker, just to see what he's capable of. The Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma situation is really weird, because it seems as though Jordan Poole has lost all semblance of himself as a player. Kuzma, I think, would thrive on a good team as a second or third option. Guys like Kispert, Malcolm Brogdon could also end up on other good teams to help them win. The season could legitimately see this team win single-digit games. They have some promise, but ultimately, they look towards the future. Bringing in a guy like Cooper Flagg would be amazing, considering that DC is the nation's capital. Here are the final rankings and tiers. I want to thank you for sticking around and making it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you liked, subscribed, and shared it with a friend. Till next time, enjoy the game, and I'll see you around.